Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Daniel chapter 9, and Daniel was reading Jeremiah, the prophets. Now, just as we would read Jeremiah, the timeline is this. Jeremiah's timeline was decades, right, previous. Our timeline is about 2,500 years, okay? Um, what's amazing is that we can look back and we can say, wow, the 70 year, right? So look at the timeline. The 70 years have been fulfilled. So now all of the prophecies most of the prophecies, I should say, that Daniel had prophesied have come to pass. So this is going to be a fascinating chapter here. And let's get in it because there's going to be a lot to unpack with what he is saying. Now, as Daniel began to read Jeremiah, that prompted him to really get into a prayer, a confession. Lord, we have sinned. He realized, man, these 70 years are almost up. He begins to pray. And so in verse 20, he says, while I was speaking, praying, confessing my sin, and the sin of my people Israel. Now, as I said before, what is interesting, you see Daniel here confessing his sin. We're never really told anything. The Bible never points out any bad thing that he's done. We know he has because he's human, and all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But Daniel was one of these exceptional people, however, that he was pretty much good for the most part, you could say. All right. He says, while I was speaking, praying, and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my petition before Yahweh my God concerning the holy mountain of my God, while I was praying, Gabriel, now we see Gabriel, right? Gabriel comes around a lot, right? God sends Gabriel, go tell him this. Remember, as an angel, you can almost say kind of a chief messenger. He sent a lot. He says, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the first vision, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He gave me this explanation. Daniel, I've come to give you understanding. So, there's a lot I think I could say about that, about these false prophets today. Notice he says, the purpose I've come is to give you understanding. God doesn't. You never these. What's always funny about these false prophets? They don't give you understanding. They always give you these riddles, these babblings of riddles. Okay, but he says here, he says, notice I've come to give you understanding. I also will say this: prophecy, revealed knowledge, is always about. In other words, the reason why God is giving us this so that we can understand. Now, understand that. When people tell you that you don't read the book of Revelation because it's such a deep, and that is man telling you that. The Revelation doesn't tell you that. In fact, Revelation tells you, blessed is he who reads and understands and does these what's written in this book. So notice the purpose is to give understanding. Verse 23, at the beginning of your petition, an answer went out, and I've come to give it to you. For you are treasured by God. So consider the message, and notice this, and understand the visions. Now he's writing this down so that what? We can understand the visions. Now, verse 24, 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city. Now let me stop. Now, the term 70 weeks here that's going to be used in this prophecy, 1 week equals a 7-year period of time. And then he says 70 weeks. So it totals 490 years, right? Okay. Now, here is the thing about this. This is not consecutive. We will see this in a moment. Now, how do we get to the point of saying 70 weeks? Or two ways we can get to 70 weeks. One, and I forgot to find this in Ezekiel. So let me think where it's at. In Ezekiel, I think I'm going to show you one possible way where we can get this. Watchmen 4. Here we go. And then Ezekiel chapter 4. Now I'm going to show you one way. So this is one of these dramatic ways in which God was kind of talking to Ezekiel. Now remember, Ezekiel is also Daniel's contemporary. He's somewhere else on the other side of Babylon. He says, then lie down on your left side and place the iniquity of the house of Israel on it, and you will bear the iniquity for the number of days you lie on your side. For I have assigned you the years of their iniquity according to the number of days you are to lie down, 390 days. So this type of 390 years in terms of going back into Israel. Now that's one way. In other words, notice, so one day is kind of coming up to a year. So 390 days as it is here is 390 years. Now, that's not the only way, but when we look at this, and as we see when this prophetic timeline starts, and you look at the 70 weeks, you'll see a timeline and up to the time of Christ. So that's another way, okay? If a person wanted to dispute that, I don't think it would be I would not argue over it, because here Daniel necessarily doesn't tell us how the weeks are calculated. We can only say that the weeks are calculated based upon what the events here will unfold. He said 70 weeks or 70 sets of sevens. You can say 70 sets of 7-year periods. He says, are decreed about your people, your holy city, to bring about the rebellion, to put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, a couple of things I think it's important to understand. 70 weeks are decreed about your people, your holy city, and then notice here, the holy place. So the people, the holy city, and then the holy place, which is the temple. I think it's important to understand prophecy when it is explicitly spelled out. It's for Israel. And I say that because, let me do a little diversion here, and let me go to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24. And this is Jesus speaking on end times. And it says in verse 3, while he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples approached him privately and said, tell us, when will these things happen? What is the sign of your coming and then of the end of the age? Okay. I want to skip down to verse 9 because he's talking about, like, you can say, two groups. And we're going to see this in a moment. I'm going to show you this here. So one, he starts off talking about then what he is telling the disciples. And then he comes to verse 9 and he says, then they will hand you over for persecution and they will kill you. You will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will take offense, betray one another, hate one another. Many false prophets will arise up and deceive many. Because lawlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Now let's stop for a moment, because I think now he's getting ready to shift thoughts. Let me come out of this to show you my artist's rendition. So when he says that the gospel kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world, that's the picture right there. And then he said, and then the end will come, culminating with Jesus bringing about the end. I want you to see that right there. Okay? That's why I say a lot of people, and by the way, when Jesus prophesied this, when Jesus spoke this, we were in the legs of iron. Look, notice that, which is the Roman Empire, right? So during that period of time, this is when Jesus is talking about in terms of uh, when he prophesied the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, and then so when you go through the end of the age, so the feet of iron and clay, which has not arisen yet, was not around during Jesus' time. He's going to point to this time. If we go back to Daniel chapter 2, you remember he interprets these kingdoms. And then this last kingdom, he says, which is the feet of iron and clay, in the days of these kings, Jesus will set up an everlasting kingdom that will never be taken away. That's why we know it hasn't come to pass yet. Okay. Now, so when we kind of go back, when Jesus is speaking here, he says, okay, so the kingdom, good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony and to all nations. So this is our purpose, our time. So then when we come to verse 15, he says, so when you see the abomination that caused desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel. Now, I haven't gotten there yet in this, but he says, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. But watch, then those in Judea. Now, remember, he shifts thoughts. The persecution we receive, all nations, right? We're going to preach the gospel in all nations. But now he shifts the thoughts and says, when you see the abomination that caused this desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those in Judea, right? So if verse 14 is referring to the same group of people, I believe this in verse 14 he's talking to his church. But now when he shifts to verse 15, we get back to what Daniel prophesied. He says, it's good news that the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations. But now he shifts, and then he says, so when you see the abomination that caused this desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. How will the reader understand? Well, the reader should understand, right? Because they should know what Daniel was saying. We'll get back to that in a moment. He says, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on a housetop must not come down to get his things out of the house. A man in the field must not go back to get his clothes. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray, now get this, that your escape may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. How did this affect, if this was referring to all the believers around the world during this time that Jesus is talking about? What about those who are in Colorado? What about those who are in Texas? I mean, or those who are in Chile, Argentina, Australia, right? So why can't you apply this to the church? He's not talking to the church. That's why. He says, verse 21, for at that time there would be, no, watch this. I'm sorry, verse 20, and pray that your escape will not be on the wind on the Sabbath. So this is why he's talking to those, Jews who will be in Jerusalem at the time, in Judea, right? Flee to the mountain of Geo. I'm going to show you this in a moment. He says, For at that time there would be great tribulation, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now, never again will be. Unless those days were limited, no one would survive, but those days will be limited because of the elect. Let me show you one more verse. Let's go to Zechariah. Zach chapter 14. All right, look at this. Oh, come on over. Here we go. Zechariah chapter 14 says, "A day of the Lord is coming when your plunder will be divided in your presence. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem for battle. The city will be captured, houses looted, the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be removed from the city. The Lord will go out to fight against those nations as he fought on the day of battle. And that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem to the east. Mount Olives will be split from the east to the west, forming a huge valley, so that half of the mountain will move to the north and half to the south, and you will flee by the mountain valley. For the valley of the mountain will extend to Azal, and you will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah the king. And then the Lord my God will come, and all of his holy ones with him." Now, remember, he said what? When you see the abomination, that is desolate. All right. So now, let's go back. 70 weeks are decreed about your people, your holy city, to bring about an end, to put a stop to iniquity, to bring about everlasting righteousness, and to seal up division. So now, this is what Jesus is talking about. And let me show you. Just so you see here, I'm going to skip down because and I'll come back to this. Verse 27, he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to the sacrifice and offering, and the abomination of desolation will be on the wing of the temple. Now, let me go back. So that's why when Jesus mentions, right, the abomination, when you see the abomination spoken by Daniel, we're in Daniel, right? So let's go back. 70 weeks are decreed upon your people, your holy city, but to bring about a rebellion, to put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to set up division and prophecy, to anoint the most holy place. The reason why I say this is because when you read prophecy, it's important that you separate, that you understand, that you point out the details. This is not talking about the rapture of the church. This is not talking about the church age. That's why when I read in Matthew 24 that there was a difference. In Matthew 24, that there was a difference in verse 14 when he says that the church would be persecuted, the believers, the disciples would be persecuted, but the gospel will be preached to all nations. But now notice what he's talking about right here. This prophecy and the one that Jesus referred to in verse 15, right, of Matthew 24, when you see the abomination that makes desolate, spoken by Daniel. Well, what is this talking about here? 70 weeks are decreed about your people, your holy city, to bring about a rebellion, to bring rebellion to an end, to put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to set up the vision and anoint the most holy place. So now this prophecy is about Israel, and that's the point what I'm saying. It's important to separate when God is talking to Israel and when God is talking about other things. So this prophecy is talking about Israel. So many times people put together Israel with the church and other things. So obviously we're going to come back on this and we're going to continue. We're going to continue. Um, um, Again, and I want to unpack this slowly to give us a little understanding before we kind of pick up our pace and move forward, because this prophecy is so important to understand. You know, so okay, Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.